Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, senior editor at Forbes. President Trump has said this week that the U.S. and China have reached a framework that would allow TikTok, the popular social media app, to remain operating in the United States. Joining us to discuss this deal and what we know and what we don't know is my colleague, senior writer Emily Baker-White. Emily, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
You've been covering TikTok for us for the past several years, but this deal marks a potential new chapter for TikTok in the U.S. And I know there's a lot we don't know, but let's just take a step back. What is President Trump saying? What do we know about this deal with China?
We've been hearing about a potential TikTok sale for many, many, many months now. And TikTok has been operating in the United States since January in violation of US law because Donald Trump has suspended enforcement of that law, saying it's okay, we're close to a deal, we're going to get to a deal. And Trump is now saying we are not entirely there, but yet closer to that deal. Basically, that the two parties, the United States and China, have agreed to the basics of the deal. And the Trump administration hasn't offered a lot of details about what those basics are. But last night, the Chinese side of the negotiators offered a bit more detail. They said that the deal would involve TikTok's Chinese parent company ByteDance still controlling the algorithms that TikTok uses and licensing those algorithms to a new TikTok entity that would be owned by American companies in the United States.
What happens next? And would this deal require congressional approval?
Well, the deal doesn't require congressional approval in the typical sense. It's not like it goes to a vote. But if the deal does, in fact, involve that licensure piece that the Chinese are saying it does, it likely violates a law that Congress passed last year. And that law said that ByteDance had to sell TikTok or TikTok was going to get banned. And by the way, if ByteDance does sell TikTok, that new TikTok entity, it shouldn't have any cooperation, and now I'm actually going to read from the statute, any cooperation with respect to the operation of a content recommendation algorithm or any agreement with respect to data sharing. Basically, Congress anticipated that we might get here. The Chinese government has been clear for a long time that they did not want ByteDance to sell this algorithm. And so Congress said, yeah, if you sell TikTok, but ByteDance still controls the algorithm, that's not good enough. And it sounds from what the Chinese negotiators are saying right now that that exact scenario may be what President Trump is planning to accept. And if Trump accepts that, and that's short of what Congress said had to happen in a law last year, then we have a situation where the president is yet again not really following the law. And the president has a lot of discretion in how to follow the laws, so it's not entirely clear that anyone can make him follow the law. But Congress could, for example, say, we're not going to pass any legislation until you enforce this. They could try to get someone who has standing to sue. That's really tricky and probably not likely to go well, but they could try it. And so what I'm watching for right now is whether the hawks behind the TikTok bill in Congress, who thought this through, saw this moment coming and said, nah, not good enough, are those people going to start standing up and saying, we don't support this? Or, as Congress has done many times before with this president, are they just going to say, meh, we got to do what the boss wants?
Or at least for the time being, are they just going to say, oh, we'll wait and see the details, because the details have been relatively scant?
Right, exactly. We don't know a lot about this deal. The Trump administration isn't telling us a lot about it. The Chinese government seems to be telling us a little bit more, but they of course have incentives for what they say too. The deal is not fully baked yet. There is not contract language that has been executed, right? The Trump administration, I think, is now saying they expect the deal to close within 30 to 45 days. We have seen with big tech deals like this, I mean, look at the Twitter deal. 30 to 45 days is eons away. Trump and Xi are going to talk on Friday. That could throw wrenches into this deal. Trump says, we have a deal, we have a deal. I'll believe it when I see an executed contract.
Now, you've been writing for Forbes.com that TikTok has effectively been in limbo for the last 9 months, and you referenced that just a few minutes ago. Do we know what prompted the developments this week? I guess what I'm asking is why now? Why is there a Friday meeting on the calendar when this has been going on for so many months?
So the Friday meeting is not just about TikTok, nor were the negotiations that took place earlier this week. The US and China obviously have a huge amount to discuss with respect to tariffs and trade policy, restrictions on chips, things like that. And so there were talks between the US and China about a whole number of items, and TikTok was just one.
I was also going to ask, earlier this week, China accused NVIDIA of violating its antitrust policy. Is that part of these negotiations, of this whole conversation, or in your opinion, is that a separate issue?
Technically, it's not part of the negotiations so far as I'm aware, but it would be an extraordinary coincidence given that the US and China were meeting and were talking about a lot of these tech questions this week. I think it's certainly curious timing, if nothing else.
Now, you have a story on Forbes.com right now with the headline, "To solve the TikTok problem, Trump has to give up his control." Explain what you mean by this.
Yeah, so since January, because Trump has just suspended enforcement of this law that would ban TikTok, TikTok is existing in the United States sort of specifically because Donald Trump is allowing it to, which has meant that at any point, if Donald Trump decided he didn't like TikTok anymore, he decided the contents on TikTok were too woke, too liberal, whatever, he could just turn TikTok off. He could just say, actually, I've changed my mind. We're going to enforce the law. And that's not a great way to regulate a speech platform. It's not a particularly constitutional way to regulate a speech platform. We don't want the government to be able to coerce or threaten, or even without saying a word, make a social media company say, ooh, we better not, publish anything or push anything or promote anything that could upset the president. That's not the world we want to live in, no matter who the president is or what his politics are. And that's the world we've been living in with TikTok. Trump has had a huge amount of power over TikTok just because TikTok has only existed because Trump is letting it do so. And I'm really eager to see that world go away. And I think a lot of people are eager to see that world go away. But if you go back to the Biden administration had its own negotiations with TikTok, and they were really trying to solve this national security problem that they saw that TikTok could be used by the Chinese government against Americans. But in doing so, the Biden administration was having these talks with TikTok that could have resulted in President Biden and then President Trump, having a lot of control over what the content is on TikTok. That Biden agreement, which never got signed, it never got finalized, but they were discussing a world in which the president would have control over content policies of a social media company, which we've never seen before, and which raises important constitutional questions. And so there's precedent here for, we get really worried about national security, we try to fix that problem, and in doing so, we end up giving our own government a lot of control over speech on a platform. Whatever happens with this deal, the Trump deal, and we don't know a lot about it, Trump needs to make sure that he doesn't try to seize control over TikTok himself in making sure that the Chinese government doesn't have that control, because neither government should be able to determine what content people see on TikTok. Either government having that control is dangerous.
I had also pulled out this quote from your piece. "There is reason for concern that the TikTok deal might give the U.S. government power over speech on the app," which gets to the point that you were just saying. So there's real concern about government interference with free speech on TikTok right now. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's absolutely fair to say. And again, this is not a partisan issue. This is something that a lot of Republicans were really worried about when Joe Biden was president. It's often the party out of power that's complaining about the party in power having that kind of power over social media. Doesn't matter who's in power. The government should not be deciding what the mix of content, what the mix of news, what the mix of political commentary is in people's information diet. And to the extent that the government has that kind of power over any social media company, that's dangerous.
And just to pull back a little bit, I am not on TikTok, but how many Americans are on TikTok? Do we know the full number?
So the last number that TikTok itself released, I believe, was back in 2023 when they said 170 million Americans, roughly half the population, use TikTok.
So when we're talking about either government interfering with free speech on this app, we are talking about an app that reaches half of the U.S. population. So this is a crucial issue for information and disinformation in the United States. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And to sort of speak up for TikTok, the company here, they'll say no government is interfering with our speech and no government is interfering with our speech policies. And that may be true in the moment, but anytime a government can simply shut an app down if they don't like it, if they don't like how things are going there, that is power. That is sort of serious coercive ability that we should be worried about.
Now, knowing that the terms of this deal are incredibly murky at best, is there anything you can say to people who use TikTok about their experience on the app in the coming days, weeks, and 30 to 40 days, that timeline that you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I would say to anyone who's on TikTok and anyone who's on Meta's platforms, Google's platforms, your YouTube, your Instagram, these are platforms that are run by companies. Companies have incentives. They often have incentives to make sure they're not pissing off governments, our own, other governments all around the world. And when you're using these platforms, know that the mix of content you're seeing is not the result of some magic algorithm that knows you perfectly. It's the result of a corporation trying to make money and trying to be able to keep doing business, which sometimes involves placating governments.
The other thing I'm curious about is we've seen how ownership can affect the user experience with other social media sites. I'm thinking of when Elon Musk purchased Twitter. That affected the algorithm, that affected my experience on the app, and I've ended up going to other social media sites to curate news feeds there. Do you anticipate major changes to the user experience in that regard when it comes to this TikTok deal?
I think it's too early to say, but I too left Twitter after the mix of content there really became unpalatable to me. And I think it's a reminder, right? It's a reminder that somebody owns these companies and those people make choices. And that's really all I want people to take away from this is like, remember that someone is making choices and that you as an end consumer are going to be affected by those choices, sort of whether you see it outwardly and realize it or not.
Now, President Trump and President Xi will be meeting on Friday. Emily, what will you be looking for in that meeting? Are there questions that you hope people will ask? Are there terms your ears will be looking for or hearing for? What will you be listening for?
I do think the details of who has what control over the algorithms that will be used in the US TikTok app, assuming there is a US TikTok app and assuming this deal sort of doesn't blow up, which of course could happen, is the biggest question for me because control over the algorithm has been a topic of discussion in this deal for years now. If Trump is really willing to say, yeah, okay, ByteDance isn't going to sell this algorithm and TikTok's going to keep using the ByteDance algorithm, that would be a pretty big capitulation for the US side of this negotiation. That would be a big win for the Chinese side. And so I'm curious to see, obviously we're hearing that that's true from the Chinese side of the deal right now. That may be sort of strategic pushing. That may not be fully baked, but I'm really curious to see where we do net out on the specifics there, because, like I said, that's been a sticking point in negotiations for many years, and if there's actually been an agreement made there, that's pretty newsworthy.
We will be watching as well. But in the meantime, Emily Baker-White, thank you so much for joining us and breaking down what we know about the TikTok deal. We so appreciate your time and insight and reporting. You can go to Forbes.com to read Emily's full story about TikTok right now.
Of course. Thanks so much.